We tend to remember historical figures as flawless, untouchable icons. But if you look closely at Abraham Lincoln and let the mythology crumble, you find a man who spent the vast majority of his life losing. His early adulthood was a masterclass in defeat. He ran for the state legislature and lost. He opened a general store, went completely bankrupt, and spent years struggling to pay off the debt. On top of that, he watched his closest personal relationships end in sudden, devastating tragedy. Most of us view a string of consecutive failures as a clear signal to quit. We treat success as a straight upward line. But Lincoln's life suggests something completely counterintuitive, that these crushing, repeated setbacks were actually an active, necessary period of preparation. To understand how a single individual could manage the collapse of the United States, you have to confront his brutal reality. When you stand beneath a towering monument to his legacy today, it is easy to forget that this exact legacy was built entirely on a foundation of failure. His baseline was sheer survival. Born on the Kentucky frontier in an isolated log cabin, Lincoln grew up in extreme poverty with almost zero access to formal schooling. With no external opportunities, he had to engineer his own. He developed a relentless, obsessive curiosity, routinely walking miles through the wilderness simply to borrow a single book from a neighbor. Then, at age 9, he watched his mother die. That profound trauma could easily break a child. For Lincoln, the isolation and grief forged a deep, quiet endurance. This brutal environment functioned as his first crucible. It hardwired his mind to tolerate severe deprivation, conditions that would quickly overwhelm anyone accustomed to comfort or privilege. Eventually, he transitioned away from frontier survival to study law and enter politics. And the political arena immediately rejected him. This chart visualizes his compounding defeats through the 1830s and 40s. We see a rapid succession of lost elections for public office, perfectly mirroring a sharp downward spike in his crippling financial debt. The sustained pressure of public defeat and financial ruin triggered periods of severe clinical depression. To the peers who knew him best, his political ambitions appeared permanently dead. Reaching this absolute floor forced a total recalibration. With his reputation in tatters and his finances gone, the noise of personal ambition fell away, leaving him to spend his years in the political wilderness, obsessing over the legal and moral arguments that would eventually define his platform. Rock bottom acted as a filter, removing his ego and leaving only a core, unshakable conviction. Instead of retreating, Lincoln used the downtime between elections as a strategic weapon. He rigorously studied the law.
He analyzed the mechanics of debate, turning his previous losses into a vast data set of what not to do. Equipped with these refined skills, he made a calculated decision to step onto the national stage and publicly challenge the expansion of slavery, the most volatile, divisive issue in the country. In 1858, he ran for the Senate against Stephen A. Douglas. Once again, Lincoln lost the election. But his debate performance was so precise, so surgically argued, that the loss actually made him a recognized political force across America. That momentum compounded. By 1860, his carefully refined message finally resonated with a deeply fractured public, placing him firmly on a legitimate national ticket. The man who had spent 30 years losing local races was elected the 16th president of the United States. Those 30 years of public rejection provided a unique, brutal education. The precise debating style and the psychological armor he developed through 3 decades of losses became the specific tools required to govern a nation on the brink of suicide. Almost immediately upon taking office, the nation fractured. The United States plunged into the Civil War, sprawling into massive military camps and producing the highest casualty rates in American history. The psychological terror of wartime command was unimaginable, yet his prior private battles with severe depression had already equipped him to process extreme grief and pressure without quitting. You can see the immense toll etched into his weary eyes. In 1863, he took his most decisive action. He issued the Emancipation Proclamation, officially rewriting the moral objective of the conflict from mere preservation of the Union to the eradication of slavery. Any leader who hadn't already mastered the art of surviving total personal ruin would have shattered under the weight of a collapsing nation. Lincoln held firm because he had been practicing for the worst his entire life. This diagram maps Lincoln's persistence. Defeats functioned as data collection exercises, feeding lessons into his next attempt. Watch as this flat loop shifts into 3D. What looks like a downward spiral is actually an upward climbing staircase. Every failure provides elevation for the next step. Historical impact is reserved for those who refuse to let a temporary, painful setback dictate their permanent identity. The next time you face a crushing defeat, do not treat it as the end of your story. Treat it as the crucible of preparation, because the empty chair of future leadership is waiting for whoever is willing to learn how to survive the fall.